right, so this is session number 6 of You Still Don't Get It, our study of the Gospel of Mark. And the one thing you don't get now is you don't get kind of a full ending. You get kind of a shocking conclusion. And so we're going to look at the last couple chapters of Mark's Gospel and kind of do that. So a question I would ask at the beginning of our session today is to think about is, well, what is your favorite meal? You can have anything. Mine is steak. I'm a steak and broccoli. And when Heather is traveling, I usually buy a couple of nice steaks and grill a steak almost every night on the grill. And I have cucumber and I have mushrooms. And she said, "What are your sides?" I said, "Cucumber and mushrooms. That's all I need. I don't the steak. I don't need anything else. I don't. So that's kind of my favorite meal. I kind of do that all the time. And so if I had to do that, I would do that. But the reason we ask that question is because one of the main points of our study today is going to be on the meal that Jesus eats with his disciples, and I considered the possibility of us doing communion together today, but since we're doing this in person and online, I didn't kind of want to separate that out so much, so we're not going to do that. But we've made plans for how we will study, how we will celebrate Holy Communion during Advent and staff this week. So we got some time scheduled for coming up where we're going to do that with our Sunday morning schedule, and so we're looking forward to that. So what's your favorite meal? The Gospel of Mark famously kind of ends abruptly with an empty tomb, and then there's no appearance of a risen Jesus. I mean, there's no time when he's cooking breakfast on the seashore. He's telling Thomas, "Put your finger here." I mean, there's none of that stuff in Mark's Gospel. He just kind of says Jesus raises from the dead, and then it's over with. I mean, there's nothing else. In fact, the response of the women at that point is odd as well compared to some of the other Gospels. So let's start reading in chapter 14. There it says, "It was 2 days before the Passover, the festival of unleavened bread. The chief priests and the legal experts, through cunning tricks, were searching for a way to arrest Jesus and kill him, but they agreed that it shouldn't happen during the festival. Otherwise, there would be an uproar among the people." It's kind of an agreement that the religious people had and the government people had, the people of Rome and other things that they were occupying through the years. They understood that they just didn't mess with certain festivals, and the Passover was one of the big festivals for the year, and so they wouldn't mess with that one at all. So they were going to wait until after it was over, which in many ways kind of happened and didn't happen, as we'll look at. So Jesus was visiting Bethany, the house of Simon, who had skin disease. During dinner, a woman came in with a vase of alabaster, made of alabaster and containing a very expensive perfume of pure nard. She broke open the vase and poured the perfume on his head. Some grew angry. They said to each other, "Why waste the perfume? This perfume could have been sold for almost a year's pay and the money given to the poor." And they scolded her. Now, in Mark's Gospel, that some say it's not identified. In other Gospels, it's Judas who says that. And we always say, well, the preacher answer that is always, well, Judas is the treasurer of the disciples, and so he was thinking about the money they could have had and how much they could have sold it and fed the poor and all these other things that he talks about. Here it's just they said, it's not a thing. So they scolded her. And Jesus said, "Leave her alone. Why do you make trouble for her? She has done a good thing for me. You always have the poor with you, and whenever you want, you can do something good for them. But you won't always have me. She has done what she could. She anointed my body ahead of time for burial. I tell you the truth, wherever in the whole world the good news is announced, what she's done will always be told in memory of her." And of course it is, because we read the story in the Gospels. Yes, go ahead.
Do you think that she brought that because she was going to treat Simon since he had a skin disease, and then when Jesus was there?
That's a possibility. I mean, I think that might be interesting. I've never really considered that as a thing.
I've never thought about the fact that there was somebody there that had a skin disease,
right.
And that just blew it.
Right. There's the nurse question right there.
That's what she was doing with it.
Right. But I think the thing that I've always thought, the image that I heard someone preach on this one time that has always captivated me is the idea that she anointed his head for ahead of time for my burial, and the idea was that there was a sense where this person said this would have, because you didn't shower every day, you didn't wash your hair, you didn't, you were always and you anointed yourself a lot because it helped keep the dust down and the bugs off and all that kind of stuff. And this was expensive perfume, so it was a smell, an odor. And I heard somebody say one time that think about Jesus on the cross, and think about every time he kind of got exhausted, his head kind of fell. His nose would come down close to his skin, and he would smell that perfume. And it would remind him of something, and it would kind of give him, I think it's a powerful image. We don't know that. That's the preacher version of the story, not biblical. I mean, it's not in there, but I think that's a really neat kind of image there to think about this woman. And the truth is, we are still telling the story because Mark wrote it in the gospel, and the gospel stories tell it, and so we read this story from time to time. It's not a story that we don't talk about it in church, and so I think it is important. I think the point of question that people always have is this idea where Jesus says, "Well, the poor you'll always have with me, but me you won't." I think again, I think that's always a troubling thing. The poor you'll always have with me is kind of, some people have used that for different justifications for different things that Jesus said that, but I think he's basically saying there's always time for doing that, and it's not just what you do in terms of the worship you offer or anything else. That there's also a chance for us to do things on a regular basis to respond to that. So then Mark starts recording Jesus and the disciples in the upper room, although in Mark's gospel it's not called the upper room, it's just this place, and there's some images about what we might find there in that thing. On the first day of unleavened bread, when the Passover lamb was sacrificed, the disciples said to Jesus, "Where do you want us to prepare for you to eat the Passover meal?" This would have been an annual occurrence. They would have always a chance when you would prepare this meal, and it was kind of like, where do you go for Thanksgiving next week? Whose house are you going to? Who are you eating with? Who's going to be around your table? Who's bringing the green bean casserole? Or whatever else you're making the plans for. It was kind of like this was their big kind of meal that they ate, religious significance, and so they would have made plans for it. Where do you want us to prepare this meal for us? So he sent two of the disciples ahead and said, "Go into the city. A man carrying a water jar will meet you. Follow him." Now, there's two parts of the story that we need to think about here. First of all is that there will be a man carrying a water jar. In the ancient Near East, as is still the case today, a man carrying a water jar would have been an unusual sight. In that culture, women traditionally carried water jars. And there's reading several biblical stories of the woman at the well in John 4 and other places like that. Sometimes household servants would be sent to get the water and perform that task. We still use that kind of expression to carry someone's water as kind of a way of doing that. It's kind of where this all comes from. To refer to performing kind of menial chores. But it would often be a female servant that would give him this task. We might also wonder why this mysterious nature of the instruction that Jesus gives. Why didn't Jesus simply give the two disciples, Peter and John, who we think it was, now direction, say, "Hey, go to the house of Simon near the gate and turn left at the gas station and go down." Why did he give them kind of specific instructions on where to go? There's a lot of reasons, I think. As far as the man carrying a water jar is concerned, commentaries in the Bible have proposed several kind of ways to identify this person. One person has suggested that the man must have lived in what's known as the Essene quarter of Jerusalem. The Essene is a religious group. The Essenes were a religious group who separated themselves from women, and so would have had to carry their own water. It was kind of like a monastic kind of order. They didn't last very long, obviously. They kind of had to do this, but they would carry their own water. But really, that's probably not true because there's really no details to kind of support that. But this is kind of what people think. Others have said that there was a Jewish custom that on the first day of unleavened bread, the master of the house had himself. What the tradition was, they would go to the fountain, the public fountain, to draw the water, which would be then used to make the unleavened bread for the Passover feast and all that kind of stuff. It was kind of a part of the celebration, part of the tradition. Uncle Joe always brings the green bean casserole at Thanksgiving, whatever it might be. But Mark's gospel shows the man was there to meet not the owner of the house, and the disciples were told to follow him. So it probably wasn't the owner of the house. It's also been suggested that the man carrying a water jar was the writer of the Gospel of Mark himself, John Mark, who we think it was. Mark lived in the home of his mother, which was where they think the upper room might have been where the Last Supper was held. In this view, if Mark's mother was a widow, as kind of tradition has asserted, then the family would have no longer been able to maintain servants, even if their home was a large one, and Mark might have had to help with tasks that would normally be too heavy for his mother to do. Some people accept this idea, but when Jesus says, say to the owner of the house, the Greek word for the owner of the house is masculine, and is more often translated in the Bible as master of the house. So it probably wasn't Mark's mother's house. But there's all kinds of theories out there, but no one really knows. We don't know who this person was. It was just a man carrying a water jar. And so they would have seen this. And the instruction would have been kind of clear that he was doing that. Why the mysterious nature of the instruction? Well, some people think it's because Jesus, even when he institutes the Lord's Supper, when they eat that meal, he says, one of you is going to betray me. So he would have kind of known this was coming. So maybe he was trying to hide the location of their meal so that Judas couldn't have the people come and show up and arrest him when during the meal time. So that's a theory too that's out there. But usually, basically, Jesus came up with a plan for how we're going to find the location of the Passover meal, and kept it kind of hidden until the last possible moment, and then they did that. So he says, whatever you enter, say to the owner of the house, the teacher asks, where is my guest room that I can eat the Passover meal with my disciples? He will show you a large room upstairs, already furnished. Prepare for us there. The disciples left, came into the city, and found everything just as he told them, and they prepared the Passover meal. Now, what I'll tell you is that when you go to Jerusalem, there is a upper room that is very ornate. It's very marble, a lot of things like that. It's kind of almost in the wall around Jerusalem. It's real close to kind of that. It's probably not what this was. It's kind of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, which is the goblet that Jesus would have used the Last Supper. Is it this gold ornate jeweled wood, or is it this old wooden kind of one? It's kind of like how that works. So there's kind of what that happens. It is a large room where Jesus kind of a guest room where he celebrated him. It's also believed that is also the location where the disciples kind of hid away until after the resurrection, where Jesus may have breathed on them, and Pentecost kind of got started. And led into Pentecost. So there you go. So there's the Passover is a Jewish holiday that commemorates the liberation of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt. It's the time when the angel of death passed over the homes marked with the lamb's blood, and so that's why it's called that. It's celebrated by retelling the story of the Exodus and eating unleavened bread called matzah, and having a symbolic meal called a Seder. This is kind of a Seder plate, a modern Seder plate. You'll see this. We do this on Thursday here at 11 First. We do that by our confirmands will traditionally prepare the food that we're eating. There's different things. Each one has some symbolism. There's the lamb shank up there, which symbolizes the lamb. There's the unleavened bread. There's bitter herbs. There's Morar, which is the kind of talking about the mortar for the bricks when they were making bricks and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things that are there. Each one of those little meals, parts of the meal, has a symbol behind it. It wasn't a meal you ate. It wasn't like your Thanksgiving dinner that you're going to have, where you're going to eat enough to take a good nap during the football game that afternoon. It's not where you're stuffing yourself. It is symbolically eating the meal. And so that's kind of what we need to understand too. So that evening, Jesus arrived with the 12. During the meal, Jesus said, I assure you that one of you will betray me, someone who is eating with me. Deeply sad, they asked him one by one, it's not me, is it? Now think about this. We always give Judas kind of this bad rap, and he deserves it. He did some bad stuff. I think there's a reason why he kind of did some of this stuff probably, but each of the disciples asked him one by one, it's not me, is it? I'm not going to do it. And what does that say about even those who became leaders of the church after that? And so Jesus says it's one of the 12 who was dipping the bread with me in the bowl. The human one goes to his death, just as it is written about him. This phrase refers to the biblical account of how he's going to be betrayed and how he's going to hand over this. And he says it would be better for that person if he'd never been born. The phrase signifies the idea that he dips the bowl. It signifies the fact that it's kind of an intimate relationship. He's close to this person. He's not distancing himself from the person who is going to betray him, even though he obviously knows who it's going to be. Because then later on in the gospel, several gospel accounts, he said, "Jews, go and do what you must do." So the story later identifies Judas Iscariot as the betrayer, but at this point in Scripture, it doesn't really identify him. It's just one of the 12. So there's a couple of things we need to get in the Passover meal. We need to get the biblical context. In the Gospel of Mark, the Last Supper, it is again this Passover meal. It is the time we do this. When I was doing campus ministry at the University of Louisville, I was in a building called the Interfaith Center, and one of the 6 religious groups that were meeting in our building was the Jewish Hillel Foundation, and they would bring a rabbi on for all of our students on campus to be able to do a Seder meal during Passover time, and it was a lot of fun, and we would be very cautious and clear about not saying not tying it into our Christian kind of understanding of it later on. So the Sunday night before we did this, when I had my Wesley Foundation students in worship, as we got ready to do communion, because we did communion each week, I would say that now Sunday, when you hear the rabbi, or Thursday when you hear the rabbi say this, or when you hear the rabbi say that, or whatever it might be, hear this, hear the liturgy we use, whatever it might, And it was a reminder to us that some of what I say, if you're an 11 o'clock person, you hear the full liturgy of communion that we do here. You kind of hear a lot of the things. If you just at 8:30, you hear just a bit of it. That story that would have been told and the reminder of that. But it's a thing. And Jesus there announces that one of his 12 is going to betray him. He gives a specific clue again about the one dipping in the bread with me. And again, the significance is that again, the act of showing of intimacy with this person, he kept this person close, and the idea that we don't identify this person. So that's kind of all in that. So then Jesus says this: while they're eating, Jesus took bread, blessed it, broke it, gave it to them, and said, "Take, this is my body." He took the cup, gave thanks, gave it to them, and they all drank from it. He said to them, "This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many. I assure you that I won't drink wine again until I drink it in a new way in God's kingdom." So in the Gospel of Mark, there's not a lot of detail. There's not a lot of flourish thing. If we traditionally in the United Methodist Church use Mark's version of kind of instituting the Lord's Supper, communion, we can do communion really fast because it's really a short kind of stuff. We use other gospel versions and add all kinds of stuff together. And when we do communion, there are things that I have to say. That's why even at 8:30, when we just kind of do that, there's words that I must say to make it communion for us as United Methodists. It doesn't mean someone said to me once, "Well, there's nowhere in the Bible where it says that." I said, "Well, true, but in the United Methodist Church, if our tradition is if you're going to do communion, then you have to say this. And it has to be an ordained person who says it." So that's just what it means for us as United Methodists. It's kind of our tradition to do that. But it's a pivotal moment in the story of Mark's Gospel where Jesus talks about a new covenant, where he takes something that is old and their understanding of it and transforms it into a new understanding of that. Just like when last week we talked about how he's talking about I'm going to die and on the third day I will raise it from the dead again. Like, what is he talking about? I don't get this. They're not going to get. Why is he changing this up? This is not the word. These are not the words we say. They would have. These Jewish guys would have heard these words since they were a very little kid. In fact, when you're a little kid in the family and your family celebrates the Seder, there are words that you say, questions that you ask that let the father of the patriarch of the family then say the things that need to be said. So they memorized this stuff. They knew this stuff. And so when Jesus says this is something different, they're like, wait a minute, I'm not getting this. This is not what we usually say. And so it would have changed that. And so there's key meanings to the story in Mark's account. So what are we going to get in Mark's account here of this thing? It's a symbol of sacrifice. The bread is broken as a representative of Jesus' body. The wine represents his blood. It's shed for many. It points to, again, suffering and death on the cross. This idea of a new covenant. It's a new relationship. God is changing things when Jesus dies and raises from the dead. Jesus changes the relationship and how that works. And then when the Holy Spirit comes, of course, it changes further. It's about redemption of sin. I've done this for the forgiveness of sins kind of thing. That's a Passover tie-in for a Jewish person. They would have gotten that. There's a foretaste of the future. I'm not going to drink this wine again until I drink it anew in the kingdom of God. And it kind of foregrounds it. It's also an idea about some pilgrim food. Because the reason we do unleavened bread in that Passover meal is because it symbolizes that they didn't have time to let the yeast in the bread make the bread rise, and so they took with them on their exodus. They took with them unleavened bread, and so it's a tie back into that of the ideas of these pilgrims on the road during their exodus, and sustaining believers on their journey through life. It brings up the context of suffering. Mark uniquely places the supper between the prediction of Judas' betrayal and Peter's denial. So there's a prediction of one of you's going to betray me, and then Peter at the end says, stop all this talk, and he says, you're going to deny me 3 times, and all this kind of stuff. So that's all in the midst of that. So after singing a song of praise, they went out to the Mount of Olives. After they finished the meal, they would have sung the second part of what's known as the Hallel, which is in Psalms 115 to 118. And the words in chapter 118 of the psalm would have been kind of ringing in Jesus' ear. Give thanks to the Lord because he is good, because his faithful love lasts forever. Let Israel say it, God's faithful love lasts forever. So Jesus would have had these words kind of ringing in his ears as he talked about this. The Lord is for me. I won't be afraid. What can anyone do to me? The Lord is for me as my helper. I look at victory on those who hate me. It's far better to take refuge in the Lord than trust in any human. So there's these words kind of reminding to those who were witnessing what was going on in Jesus' arrest and trial, but also to Jesus as he prays in the garden, as he faces the cross, as he does all that stuff. So all that is kind of in that psalm, and all that would have been in Jesus' ears as he's talking about this. So we learn as Jesus approaches the Garden of Gethsemane that Jesus and the disciples are tested. Jesus predicts the scattering of the disciples, and Jesus is attacked. All this happens. Peter's denial happens. All this stuff starts to happen. So Jesus said to them, you'll all falter, and you're faithless to me. It is written, I will hit the shepherd, and the sheep will go off in all directions. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you into Galilee. That phrase, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter, is a biblical prophecy from Zechariah 13:7. And it is filled when Jesus is arrested. Zechariah 13:7 said, sword, arise against my shepherd, against the men responsible for my community, says the Lord of the heavenly forces. Strike the shepherd in order to scatter the flock. I will turn my hand against the little ones. So there is a reference there that would not have been missed by the Jewish disciples in there, or anybody else hearing Jesus say that. It means that if the leader is removed, the followers will be left vulnerable, disorganized, fleeing in fear and confusion. Jesus quotes this verse both in Matthew and in Mark, predicting the disciples' scattering. What do we get out of the disciples' scattering? First of all, it is a fulfillment of prophecy from this Zechariah 13:7. Strike the shepherd, the sheep will be scattered. It is a fulfillment of what Jesus says is going to happen. He predicts it's going to happen, and it does happen. It actually does happen. They do scatter. The prophecy describes the immediate aftermath of Jesus' arrest and crucifixion, when his followers were afraid and left him alone, and then been locked behind doors and all that kind of stuff. It also talks a little about hope. But after I'm raised up, I will go before you to Galilee. This offers a message of hope. And in other Gospels that do post-resurrection accounts, there is the word that Jesus tells the women is, go and tell my disciples that I will go ahead of them into Galilee, just like I told them I would. So Peter says, even if everyone else stumbles, I'm not going to. But Jesus says, I assure you this very night before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And Peter insisted, if I must die alongside you, I won't deny you. And they all said the same thing. Yeah, I'm with you, Peter. Okay, we're with you, Jesus. And then it doesn't happen. So then we have the story of Jesus and his disciples. They sung this hymn. They go out to the Mount of Olives, the Garden of Gethsemane. And Jesus said, sit here while I pray. And he gets Peter and James and John with them. He began to be anxious. He prays. So I'm very sad, as if I'm dying. Stay here and keep alert. But he goes off and prays a little farther, and he comes back and finds them sleeping. He does it a couple more times. And his prayer is, God, not my will, but yours be done. So there's a lesson out of Gethsemane that we need to get about this story. There's the etymology of the name Gethsemane. It comes from the Aramaic words gat and shemamin, which means press oils, which is where they would press the oils out of the olives, kind of like that, to create that kind of stuff. So that's what Gethsemane really means. It is a garden on the slope of the Mount of Olives. The location is east of Jerusalem. As you walk out of Jerusalem, out of the gates of the city, and you go over towards there's a garden of olive trees that they kind of protect. There's a fence around them. You can't get close to them or anything else. And then there's a path that leads up. Now, if you kept walking up that hillside from outside Jerusalem into the Mount of Olives, into Gethsemane, if you kept going, you would go over top of that and you would end up in Bethany. You would end up where Jesus spent a lot of time at the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus and those people that he kind of spent some time with there when he was in Jerusalem. So it would not have been an unusual place for Jesus to spend time and to be around there. So he would have kind of been in there. It also has some figurative meanings. It talks about the suffering. It is has come to be known as a place of intense suffering and a great spiritual struggle. The other thing that's interesting is that right next to there's a church. Of course, there's cathedrals and churches everywhere, all over all these sites in the Holy Land now. But right next to that, there's a cemetery right off the other side, just off the other side, where that goes, and it's just kind of symbolism is kind of not lost on you when you're there. And one of the things that's cool is that the tradition is that we put flowers on graves. They tend to put rocks on people's graves, and most of the tombs are not. You're not buried 6 feet under. Your tomb is kind of sitting almost on top of the. For a lot of them are sitting right out there on top. The vault is kind of right there. It's concrete. It's in there, but it's you're not. They didn't bury people the same way we bury people today. So it's an interesting kind of different. And the symbolism there is it literally means olive press, which means it's the idea of being pressed. And Jesus says, I pray and I sweat. He said they sweat, being like drops of blood. So it's almost like it's being squeezed out of Jesus in this midst of intentional struggle. So he said he comes back and finds them sleeping, and he prays the same words again. And he come back and he finds them sleeping, and he prays the same words again. And then Jesus asked as he asked his closest disciples to stay with him and pray, the disciples just couldn't seem to make that happen. Jesus says the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And I think that's a lesson for us as modern day disciples. Is think about this. Yeah, I want to do this, but sometimes it doesn't always happen. I don't always do this. I have started going to. I was thinking to myself this morning. I was last week as part of a wellness grant that the church offers for clergy. I joined a gym, and I was going to the gym, and then I left town, and then I came back, and I haven't gotten back yet. So I was thinking today, I gotta get back, because I had this habit going, and I left town, and now I got to develop the habit again. Sometimes I want to, but the flesh is sometimes a little weaker than my desire to kind of spend a little time, get myself in a little better shape. And then Jesus says, the time has come for the human one to be betrayed in the hands of sinners. Get up, let's go. Look, here comes my betrayer. So Jesus looks and sees Judas, and those who are coming with Judas come to him, and they do that. And suddenly, while he was still speaking, Judas, one of the 12, came with a mob carrying swords and clubs. They had been sent by the chief priests, legal experts, and elders. His betrayer had given them the sign, arrest the man on a kiss, and take him away under guard. Now, imagine that. Imagine that you're Jesus. You already said Judas is going to betray you. He's the one dipping the bread in the bowl with me. You know it's Judas. In the other gospel accounts, he says, go and do what you must do. So you know he knows who it is, that Judas is going to do this. And he lets Judas walk all the way up to him and kiss him as a sign of that. I mean, that shows kind of Jesus' commitment to kind of what his acceptance of his divinely ordained path, even as it exposes the weakness of the followers, the sinfulness of the others. It's presented as a fulfillment of Scripture. The rest is portrayed as a fulfillment of the prophecy that he's going to be doing. It's part of the divine plan. Jesus submitting to authority, and there's a couple of things that have some contrasting reactions. The disciples' the fear and scattering of his followers, including the young man who fled naked. Most traditions say that young man who fled naked, he was wearing his cloak, and as he fled, they grabbed at it and it came off of him. It's like a tearaway jersey they used to have in football teams. It tore off of him, and he fled away naked. Most tradition is that is Mark, the author of this gospel, and that's why he's the only one who kind of tells that part of the story. Who else would have even thought about that, right? We would have talked about the naked kid running around the Garden of Gethsemane, right? But he does. So it kind of has this idea of that. It also talks about the human sinfulness of the hostility of the priest. I mean, in other gospel accounts, Jesus says, I was with you every day. You could have got me anytime you wanted to, and now you come with me with swords and clubs. I think that's an interesting part of the story. After that, Jesus goes to is led away to the high priest and the chief priests and the elders and the legal experts gathered. Peter falls from a distance. That's when Peter's denial of Jesus happens 3 different times, and all that stuff. And then the high priest stands up in the middle of the gathering and examines Jesus. Aren't you going to respond to the testimony these people have brought against you? But Jesus was silent and didn't answer again. Again, the high priest asked, are you the Christ, the Son of the Blessed One? And Jesus said, I am, and you will see the human one sitting on the right side of the Almighty and coming on heavenly clouds. Then the high priest tore his clothes and said, why do we need any more witnesses? You've heard his insult against God. What do you think? So they all start to condemn down. So Jesus faces 2 trials here. And we get a lot out of him facing 2 trials. He faces a religious trial here before the Jewish leaders. And they charge him in Mark 15 with blasphemy. And that is the idea of taking on something that is God's responsibility, taking it on for yourself. That's what blasphemy really means. Only God can do this. Why are you doing this? And so Jesus makes this claim that I am the Son of God, and you're going to see the Son of Man coming on the clouds in the sky. And oh my gosh, he's making religious claims, and so we can't have that. And so they are doing that. But then Jesus has to go under a civil trial before the Roman authorities because they want Jesus put to death, but the Roman government did not allow religious trials to have capital punishment. So they were not allowed to do that. So if they want Jesus crucified and want him killed for his crimes, then they're going to have to come up with another way to do that. So they come up with other trials, and the other trial, the other charge against Jesus is not blasphemy, because that the Romans don't care about that. You know, they blaspheme against the the God of the Israelites all the time. Their charge is, he says he's the king of the Jews. So he says, if you say you're the king, then you're saying Caesar's not king. And so that becomes a charge which has some political kind of ramifications. So that's kind of interesting. Happens there. Let's see. And then we have the discussion of Pilate releasing one prisoner to them after his trial with him, and all the kind of stuff, and what would happen, and giving him the choice between Jesus and Barabbas, and they chose to release Barabbas, who was a terrible person, and they wanted Jesus crucified. And so it becomes this trial that happens from both a religious side, and then a second trial that happens from a political side of things. And so they lead Jesus away and they crucify him. And we can spend a lot of time on that crucifixion, but I think we spend, that's a part of the gospel story I think we spend a little more time on. We talk about the crucifixion all the place. There's a place, they brought Jesus to a place called Golgotha, which means skull place, and for the crucifixion. One of the things that's very interesting about going to the places they venerate in the Holy Land about where these things take place is that there is a church, which is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is one of the places where they think the cross was. And there's underneath the altar in the middle of this church, there's a hole, and you can reach your hand underneath there and reach your hand down in there and reach in that hole, and they think that one of the places they venerate is where the cross was. And it's very interesting because when you go into this place, you go in and there's three different branches of the Christian church in the Holy Land there in that same building, and they all kind of are, there's no walls in between them. They're all they have kind of like wings of the church kind of going towards this one kind of location. But you, as a tourist, you walk in, your tour guide starts explaining to you, oh, go there, and there. So you walk up here, and they're having church while you're walking through this church. Mm-hmm. So it's very interesting when it happens. And they're just totally used to it. They don't even worry about it. They just know what's going to happen. And the truth is that if it didn't happen for them, then they probably will be able to keep the building open because they don't. That pays for the building to operate. So you kind of do that. So so there's there. So we can talk about those stories, and I'll be glad to get questions about them. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time with them because I think we do spend a lot of time talking about those stories through the end of it. So then we have this story that when Jesus was crucified, since the curtain of the sanctuary was torn in two from top to bottom. And when the centurion who stood facing Jesus saw how he died, he said, this man was certainly God's son. There's two things in that part of the story that are important. The temple was torn in two. The curtain of the temple was torn in two. There is in the temple, the way it's constructed, there's a curtain that hangs kind of between the altar and into the Holy of Holies that only the high priest is allowed to go into. It separates humanity from the presence of God, from what is the physical presence of God. And so when that curtain is torn in two, it's a religious way of saying that veil between heaven and man and people is no longer there, and we can kind of we don't have to have anything that stands between us and the very presence of God. And that's why then the next statement is the centurion said, this man certainly was God's son. Because there is this idea where in both ways. So Jesus faces two trials, a religious trial and a political trial. And then there's a statement here that Mark makes in two sentences where he basically says, two verses where he kind of talks about how the religious curtain was torn in two that separates us. And then the centurion makes this statement which almost talks about the political stuff being that separated them kind of being removed. And I think the reason why those statements are there, in other Gospels, there's other things added to those stories, but Mark just kind of says, just the fact, kind of gives us that. And I think that's the significance of those two stories. The disciples fled. They ran off. They weren't there when Jesus was crucified. In John's Gospel, John is there, but we kind of know this is going to happen. And it says some women were watching from a distance, including Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, the younger one, and Joseph and Salome. When Jesus was in Galilee, these women had followed and supported him along with many other women who had come to Jerusalem with him. Since it was late in the day on preparation day, just before the Sabbath, Joseph of Arimathea dared approach Jesus and ask for Jesus' body. Joseph was a prominent council member who also eagerly anticipated the coming of God's kingdom, which means he was expecting the Messiah to come and was thinking maybe this is it. Pilate wondered if Jesus was already dead. He called the centurion and asked him whether Jesus had already died. When he learned from the centurion that Jesus was dead, Pilate gave the dead body to Joseph. That's a big deal. Most people who were crucified in that day were just simply left on the cross as a deterrent for anybody else who would walk by that road. This is what we do to people around here who cause problems. So don't do it. And so for somebody to be taken down from the cross would have been kind of a special situation. So Pilate gives the dead body to Jesus. He bought a linen cloth, wrapped him up in the cloth, and laid him in a tomb and carved in a rock. Now, the other thing I'll say to you is this linen cloth. There's all kinds of stories about the shroud turning and all this kind of stuff, and how it was wrapped around Jesus' face, and now when you take it off, you can see Jesus outlined in the cloth. I don't know. I mean, yeah, possibly, but I don't. That's not. That has never been a big thing for me. I've never been too worried about that. But it says he laid him in a tomb and been carved out of rock. Now, in Jerusalem, outside of the edge of Jerusalem, there's a place that's called that they venerate as the Garden Tomb, which has got a little fenced-in area. It's got a nice little garden. It's got a tomb you can walk into and kind of look around. It's got a gift shop, so you can buy your gifts and stuff like that for your tourists and stuff like that. And typically, what we did is that tour groups get to take communion there at the site of that thing. I don't know if that's it or not. That's just what they venerate as it. I think all these sites are kind of like this is our best guess, so we're going to venerate this site. It's been that way for many, many years. But it's interesting because there's a rock wall behind it, and there is it looks like, especially once they tell you that's what it is, it looks like more like exactly like a skull. So it's a place of the skull. It's kind of like what we think. And then they think, well, maybe up there on top is where the crucifixion happened. But now, today, up on top, when you walk up there, there's a 10-foot tall chain link fence and a bus depot up there for tour buses. So it's kind of this is people live still in this area now. And it's not just a holy kind of touristy spot. Yes.
When you took communion at that place, who gave it to you?
Our bishop did it because I was on a tour group as a new ordained. I don't know, new at the time. I never got to go. Our bishop at the time I was ordained didn't do it, and so they took all of us later on to go. And so Heather and I got to go on the trip, and they paid for my trip, so we only had to pay for Heather's trip for us to go. So it was really great. But we got to go, and we got to spend time. And our bishop and his wife were part of our tour guides, and so they did communion for us. So.
They just somebody that
No.
That's more meaningful.
Because, well, the other thing is because for every person, every group that's there, depending on what tradition you're from, you have to have somebody from that tradition. A lot of them have to have somebody from that tradition do the communion for them. It wouldn't be something we would worry about necessarily if somebody was there doing it. We would not worry about it too much. But like if you're Roman Catholic or you're someone else, you would need to have somebody in that tradition to be able to do that for it to be considered communion. So. When the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene, the mother of James, and Salome brought spices so they could go and anoint Jesus' body. This was a tradition. Everybody did this when somebody was buried. They started asking very early on the first day of the week, just as of sunrise, they came to the tomb. They were saying to each other, "Who's going to roll the stone away?" Because they had rolled a huge stone in front of this. When they looked up, they saw that the stone had been rolled away, and it was a very large stone. details that seem very strange for Mark to add, but maybe they were added later. Going to the tomb, they saw a young man in a white robe sitting on the right side. And they were startled. But he said to them, "Don't be alarmed. You're looking for Jesus of Nazareth who was crucified. He has been raised. He isn't here. Look, here's the place where they laid him. Go tell his disciples, especially Peter," interestingly enough, especially big mouth Peter, who always wants to talk about how he knows everything. Tell him that. And you will see him just where he told you. So he told you he's going to head to Galilee, so that's where you're going to see him. Overcome with terror and dread, they fled from the tomb, and they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. All right, now here, that's really different from any other gospel account. Of any kind of, they all have these stories of how they go back and they tell the disciples, and then Peter and John kind of race to the tomb. In John's gospel, John just runs ahead of Peter amazingly, and John gets there because John's writing the gospel. And all this happens, and Mark doesn't, they go away and they don't tell anybody. I ain't talking about this, but dead guys come back to life. So even at the very end, when these people see this angelic being in the tomb kind of talking to them, they don't get it. They still don't get it. Jesus has told them this is going to happen. They heard it over and over again, and now they've seen it for themselves, and they just still don't get it. And they do that. So this is kind of Mark's abrupt ending. It's an unconventional ending, and I think it reveals something about Mark's understanding of discipleship. And know that I think it kind of shows that sometimes it's even when God shows us some stuff, and even when we kind of get stuff, we don't really get all of it, and so it kind of becomes an important part of the story for us. And I think the shock ending forces the reader of Mark's Gospel then and now to consider Jesus' identity and decide for themselves if they're going to follow him even without all the answers, even without everything figured out. Now, in your Bible, you're going to look and you're going to say, well, wait a minute, that's not the end of Mark's Gospel. But if you, depending on the version of the Bible that you have and how modern it is in terms of the writing, it's going to say Mark 16, 9-20, the longer ending of Mark's Gospel. Most scholars think that this was an additional ending added to Mark's Gospel. It does not fit. It is not there. Jesus appears and speaks to the disciples, but there's also a note in most of our versions saying that this was not a part of the original book, only found in later translations. What we found is that we have found early manuscripts of all of the books in different ways, pieces and parts, a lot of them, but this longer ending has only been found in versions that were produced after a certain date. It was added in because they didn't get it, and so just like I even said when I'm talking about this now, all right, other stories we hear other things about this, and other gospels they tell us this because that helps us understand it better. But Mark doesn't even do that. It's possible that the original ending got lost, or that Mark never actually finished his account, but it's most likely that that abrupt ending was intentional because Mark's whole point throughout the whole gospel has been, you still don't get it. You still don't get it. The disciples don't get it. The crowds don't get it. And now these women who see an empty tomb don't get it. The entire story is kind of focused on this kind of shocking ending. And I think it fits when Jesus is doing it. So there's a longer ending there, but I don't think it was a part of the original Gospel of Mark, and so that's why I haven't spent a lot of time with it. So that kind of wraps up Mark's Gospel and kind of where we go. And I think from the very beginning of the Gospel story, there's this idea that you're trying to reveal different things along the way, and you're getting bits and pieces of it, but we're still not fully understanding. We're still not fully getting it, and even here at the end, it's kind of a reminder that there is a faith that happens that is necessary for that, regardless of whether or not we have all the answers. I just had a conversation with someone the other day who told me they were questioning why even though different traditions have different kind of understandings. They, why do you think yours is right? And I said, well, it's called faith, and if you believe something, then you think it's right. That's kind of what it means to believe something. I'm not so arrogant that I think that I have the only right answers, and I have all the right answers. I've got everything figured out. But I think the idea here is that it's also called faith because even when we don't quite understand it, we have to believe. And that's what Mark's gospel, I think, invites us to do. So that's where we'll end Mark's gospel here and look at what we're going to do. And so it's a great way to kind of wrap up a story that's important for the church. I think, again, it's the first gospel written, so it's the first account that the early church would have read.